All right, we're back again today. So since Tuesday, I guess, when I last streamed, I've been doing some work, experimenting with some features in Godot, and also trying to block out what I think some of the mini games should look like. I realized that what I was doing, just trying to make the textures without really figuring out what the overall composition would look like, was kind of backwards. So just looking at what I've got here now, if I start this up, quite a bit different from where it was before. So this is now the running mini game, and what I was kind of envisioning all along for how this should look. So it's got that mechanical industrial feeling to it. I've brought in that sickly yellow green light, and I've also brought in some of the amber, and you can see I've brought in the texture that I made on Tuesday's stream. Now obviously that texture does not make sense here. We already talked about that on Tuesday, but this is the aesthetic I'm going for really for the whole game. This is supposed to look like some sort of grimy industrial facility, something out of a Saw movie, or some horror movie from the 80s or 90s. And I think this kind of captured it well. There's a lot of elements I've taken from some other movies here. A lot of the mechanical bits up here were more or less taken or heavily inspired by the pie machine from Chicken Run. So this is more what I'm going for. The other thing I did, though, is I was playing around with Godot's stencil buffers, which is a feature I've been really excited to see. So I've got it set up here where I can press space to toggle the door. And as you can see, when I open the door, there's now a bunch of trees back there. Now, why are there trees? Because it was an easy model to import. That's not realistically what would be there. But I can toggle it again, and now here's this mini game. Toggle it back for this one. So this is how the door is meant to work in game. You go up to it, you hit the override switch, and then it flips open, and there's some random mini game behind it. And there may or may not be an item in the final game that lets you shut the door and reopen it to have a different mini game. And the idea is that you never know what's going to be behind the door. It's going to randomly pick from a huge library of mini games. Think of it like a WarioWare or a Mario Party kind of thing. And one of the things I really want to play with in this game, and a core tenet that's not something that's really in the proof of concept, is a very uneasy, almost like the entire facility is alive or fighting back against you. And one of the ways I intend to do that is by having instances like this of just completely impossible geometry. Things where the door will open into some random place you've never seen, or windows in this subterranean hallway that look out over upside down pyramids and weird junk like that. Just playing into the notion that this place is not normal. There is something weird going on here. Now this effect, it's not that I just have trees behind this door. If I quit this and I go into the editor, there's no trees out here. There's nothing behind the door, actually. And you can actually see that not only is there nothing behind it, there's a tunnel behind it. But when you go into the game and I toggle it, that tunnel is now gone. And that is being accomplished using a stencil buffer. So you can see the effect taking place right here. If I sit here in front of the door and look out, I can see the trees. I go to the other side, there are no trees. The reality is the trees are there, but they only get rendered if you look at them through an invisible plane. So there's this invisible plane here that sets a flag in the stencil buffer, and then the trees are set up so that when they render, they will only display if that particular pixel on screen has that value set in the stencil buffer. And this has a lot of really nice benefits. Stencil buffers can be used for all kinds of stuff. One of the big things is that in AAA games, for instance, Halo 3, your gun is being rendered at least partially using a stencil buffer. It's an easy way to get something to ignore the depth buffer on the screen, and all kinds of other behaviors like that. Holograms, there's a great example that made a few news articles and is up on YouTube from another developer, where they had a holographic panel that if you looked at it, you would see shapes and things that looked like they were part of the hologram. And the reality is it was just the exact same trick as this. They were just set up to only be rendered if you looked at them through the stencil buffer, or I should say through the plane that's setting the stencil buffer. So this is my first time playing with it, and real quick, just to kind of go through and show how this works, because it's easy to do, but it's not obvious how you do it. So you don't even need code, you don't need shaders, but you do need to customize your materials. So if you just import an object straight from Blender or wherever, it's not gonna work. You have to do some extra steps on the material. So first thing here is the screen. Now the material here importantly has the transparency mode set to alpha. You have to do that because the stencil buffer is calculated, to my understanding, I'm not an expert in this if that's not clear, it's calculated during the alpha pass. So you'll get a warning in the editor if you try to use stencil buffers without it. Then I wanted the window to just be clear, because this isn't really a window, it's just supposed to be a portal. So I just lowered the transparency. That's not important. You can set this to whatever you want. You can change it to a solid color. In fact, you can actually see what kind of weird effects that has if you do that. But for my purposes, didn't matter. Just set it to transparent white. What matters is when you get all the way down here to the bottom, you have the stencil mode. Now, there's only a few options, but it does tell you what they do for the most part. So they have some canned effects. You can add an outline, you can add an X-ray, or you can do custom. Outline and X-ray are pretty much exactly what you'd expect. Outline just adds like a cartoon outline to something. And there is some additional stuff you have to use that. You have to provide a second pass shader so that it knows what to outline it with. And then similar with X-ray, X-ray kind of does you can see through walls, see the outline of somebody through walls, like what you get with Left 4 Dead when a survivor's in a locked room. And again, that uses the second pass shader. The custom is the interesting one though. What that allows you to do is essentially toggle rendering on or off for a given pixel on the screen, depending on the value of the depth or on the stencil buffer. Which I guess I should say, I'm gonna bring up a sprite real quick just to show what if you're not familiar with the concept. So the stencil buffer, if you think of it, you have on the display, this is the physical display on your monitor, right? That is in effect a display buffer. It's the final output. So it's whatever resolution your monitor is, 2560, 1440, whatever. But graphics engine and pipelines don't write directly to that typically. You're normally writing to something called a back buffer, which is another copy of the data that's being stored usually in the GPU's memory, which the GPU will write all of the pixels that are going to be displayed onto this back buffer, and then it will copy it or flip it to the buffer that's used for the display. Now, in a very basic rendering setup, that's kind of it. So that's the extent of it. But as soon as you start dealing with 3D, you need another buffer typically. You need something called the depth buffer. So the depth buffer is like a simplified image, whereas these two are, RGB or whatever format of color. The depth buffer only stores grayscale. And really, honestly, it's just we choose to interpret it as grayscale, but it just stores at each pixel a number. And that number is how close or how far away a particular thing is from the screen or from the camera that's rendering this scene. And that's used by the rendering pipeline to figure out what object is in front of another, or really which piece of a polygon is in front of another. So it will write the depth of every single, what's called fragment, which is, think of it just like a pixel on a polygon. It writes the depth of every single one of those to the buffer, and it's able to determine using that buffer whether or not, oh, this thing is obscured, I shouldn't render it, or this thing is in front of that, I should render it. You can also use it for things like fog. You can look at the depth buffer and decide that any depth value get greater than some value will be obscured with fog. There's all kinds of things you can do with that. That's typically used internally by the rendering pipeline as part of that process, but you can get access to it in shaders and things like that. So we've already got at least 3 different buffers being used here. The stencil buffer is an additional buffer, and I believe you can actually have multiple, but I'm not 100% on that. I'm not as familiar with the concept. The stencil buffer is an additional buffer that, like the depth buffer, doesn't store color. It stores a single piece of data per pixel. And what that data is up to you. You can choose what you put in that stencil buffer. So in the case of Godot, they expose the ability to write a number between 0 and 255 into the stencil buffer, and then you can read that value back in a shader. Now, Godot's standard material is basically a pre-made shader with a bunch of parameters for you, and they expose the ability to toggle rendering based on the values of that stencil buffer. So on this panel here, I have it set to custom. So I don't want to add an outline. I don't want to add an X-ray. I want to do something custom with the stencil shader. And specifically what I want to do is I want to write an arbitrary value to it. And then this is where it gets a little weird, because you have this comparison as always. Just ignore that, leave it be. Reference is the important part. That is the number I am going to store in the stencil buffer. So if we imagine the viewport here is the in-game camera, every pixel on my display that is being passed through this display is going to have its corresponding pixel in the stencil buffer set to 7. So that's what's going on there. That's all this is doing. It's not, there's really nothing else to it. There's no shader attached. That's it. That's the extent of what that material does. Now, the heavy lifting comes from the actual stuff behind it. So if we go to these trees are from a Pizza Doggy asset pack, but I've customized their material. So if we go to the actual tree, it looks like this is not going to pick this up, so you have to take my word for it. But in the actually, you know what, I can do this. So inside the tree, there's 2 meshes, and each of these meshes has a different material on it. And what I have done is in the import settings, so when you double click the GLB file down here in the file system, it will open the advanced import settings. I have gone into there and I have used the override material option to tell it don't use the default material that came with this model, use a material that's stored in my project. So I made a pine bark and a pine branch material using the bark and branch texture that come with the model. And those are automatically unpacked for me here. So in these materials, you can see again, because we're doing stuff with the stencil buffer, I switch the transparency to alpha. And I apply whatever the correct texture would have been. But then importantly, all the way down here in the stencil, again, we don't want to use an outline, we don't want to use X-ray, we want to do something custom. So here, we set it to read. So this thing is going to read the stencil buffer, and we're going to say, when the value of the stencil buffer is equal to 7. Well, okay, well, when it's equal to 7, what? Well, this is where it's a little unintuitive. What custom really means, as far as I can tell, is conditional rendering. When the value is equal to 7, render. There doesn't seem to be anything else you can do with that, as far as I've done in some of my research. Now, if you write your own shader, you can do more. But the standard material, that's what you can do with it. is you can set it to a fixed value. You can set it to the depth value, which is this third option here, or you can compare against that. And there's different comparison options. You can use greater than, less than, not equal, whatever. So that adds the trees. The trees are basically just saying that if I'm being viewed through an object that is setting the stencil buffer of its on-screen pixels to 7, then I will render myself on that pixel. But it's not going to just render the whole object. We obviously don't see the trees sticking up out here. It will only do it for those pixels where it's set. Now there's another important detail here, and that's render priority. If you just do this as is, it won't work. The trees will just disappear. And the reason for that is, by default, everything has a render priority of 0. And when you have everything at a render priority of 0, the shader that handles this screen may get run after the trees are calculated. So if the trees are rendered and then they say, oh, well, there was nothing in the stencil buffer, they'll just disappear. And then if at the very end the panel gets rendered because it's closer to the player, well, then great. Or closer to the camera, I should say. Now it's set it to 7, but the trees were already rendered, or not rendered, because it wasn't set. So the other thing you have to do is adjust the render priority. So if you go into here, this material, you can see I set its render priority to -1. So it will always be rendered before these trees. That's the important part. Setting it to -1 makes it render first. Now, I could have also set the trees to 1 and left the render priority of the window at 0, but it seemed easier to me to do it this way. But now that's not all. If that was all I did, that would explain why the trees are getting rendered. That wouldn't explain anything else, like where the tunnel is in the scene. And that's because I also went into the tunnel material and enabled the alpha transparency on it and did the same thing, except I set it to not equal. So the tunnel will not be rendered in any pixel that has that stencil buffer set to 7. And 7's just arbitrary. You can set that to whatever number. So that's how I'm achieving the effect. There is a weird side effect, though, that I'm not entirely certain how to fix just yet. And that's, you'll notice, if I come out here, there's just a series of tunnels. But I go into them, why can I still see the grid? And you'll notice as I move, the tunnel suddenly becomes solid and transparent again. That's because I set that transparency mode to alpha. I don't completely understand what's happening here, to be honest. The texture of the tunnel has solid transparency. There is no semi-transparency on this texture. It's completely solid. But I think just because these are being rendered in the alpha pass, it's causing some strange issues. So in the editor, the issue is that you can partially see through the walls. Right now, we're actually not looking at the outside of the wall. We're looking at the inside of the wall. And we can see the grid where we shouldn't be seeing the grid. In game, it has a different issue. So right here, it looks fine. Nothing looks wrong, right? Like everything's normal. Until I change mini games. And you can see as I move closer and further away, that just appears and disappears. And the thing is, that's a solid wall right there. I shouldn't be able to see that. And this panel has nothing special set. It's not using the stencil buffer. It's not doing any funky stuff with the depth buffer. There is just some weird interaction going on because it passes, it's getting clipped by this wall. And this wall has the alpha, is being rendered in the alpha pass. Something strange happens when you get closer and further away from it. And I really don't actually know what's going on there. I don't know how to fix that or what's even causing it. So all of this kind of comes with the asterisk of the effect does kind of work, but I think I'm going to have to do some more research into it to figure out what exactly is going wrong and why it's doing that and what I can do to fix it. I'm sure there is a fix, but it's probably going to be more involved than I may necessarily like. But this just kind of gives you an idea what you can do with the stencil buffers and what I'm planning on doing with the direction of the game right now. This is an effect I plan on using for a lot of the mini games. There's quite a few of them that I intend on having some view. The intent is that the door is opened and it's almost like a portal showing you some completely random place. I'm not going to get into the lore I have planned for the game on why that's happening or what that means, but that's the goal. And it's not just on the doors that I'm planning at. There's actually a couple enemies that I have planned that aren't in the POC that, if possible, I'd like to use the same effect there too. But that will come up probably in a later stream whenever I get to it, if I can resolve all the issues with this effect. Now, kind of getting back to the art study side of things, I'm not completely happy with this yet. I think the lighting looks good. I like the green lighting coming up from the bottom. There's not really a source for that, but I like it. And I like the amber at the bottom as well. I like the mesh. There's some funny stuff in there. Again, I want to kind of emphasize the game's humor in the design. So one of the things is, this is meant to be like an air conditioning compressor, and there's a whole bunch of, like, if you ever seen inside of a control panel for like a CNC machine or something, there's like little modules for programmable logic and whatever, but then there's just a hamster wheel. So the intent is there's going to be a little hamster down there running, just weird junk like that. Just sort of things that you might not notice right away, but it's in the background. So I'm not completely happy with it because I don't like how flat this is. It doesn't look like I'm looking at the inside of a door, which is what I'm going with. Like, I intend for this thing to open it to be an absolute mess of junk, but it should still look like it's the inside of this door mechanism. Because what's supposed to be happening isn't that the door opened, it's that an access panel slid open, and now you're seeing the inside of this big mechanical door. But at the moment, it just looks like you're looking at like a wall in a factory, and part of that's because of the placeholder textures I've applied are look like concrete, but there needs to be more stuff going on in here. And I think I probably need, I don't want to go too fall into the trap of trying to do realism in a game, but I want to also add some hint that this is a door. You know, things like big deadbolts or something, maybe a rack and pinion on a deadbolt. That could actually be maybe something I put there instead. The other thing is the door. I've been thinking about how the door is going to open, and what I'm thinking I want to do is have the door, whenever it opens properly, do this, go up and down. But whenever you open the maintenance hatch, instead of doing that, I'm actually thinking that two panels would slide to the left and right, or maybe those panels would slide under these bigger panels or something. I don't, and part of the reason I want to do that is I want to hide the edges here. So at the moment, the fact that the edges are here kind of ruins the illusion. I want to hide that, and if I have the doors slide side to side and just not slide all the way off, you know, out of the frame, I can kind of cut off the edge here and hide that. So that's something I'm actually doing here. You notice that the door didn't open all the way, so you can kind of look in down there, and with some greebling and some textures that imply more detail, I think that would look good. Same thing up here. It doesn't actually open all the way. So that's what I'm going for with the design of the doors, at least of this minigame. Some of the others are going to be a little, you know, they really are supposed to look like the door just opened to some random place. But this one in particular, I want to keep this really nasty, grimy industrial style. And I like how it's come out. These little bellows things in particular, I really like. The lighting of them and the texturing of them, and again, this is just a placeholder texture, but just the look reminds me of like a pre-rendered game from that era, something like Garage Bad Dream Adventure. It looks like a piece of machinery that was pre-rendered. And there's something about the lighting of that era of games that just looks really unnatural, and I think that caught it there. So I'm really happy with that. The other thing I did is I enabled vertex lighting, which is actually kind of interesting here because it's not immediately obvious that this is using vertex lighting instead of normal lighting. You can kind of see like how the fronts of these aren't lit, but the sides are. And the other thing that stands out, it may not be as, oh, there it is. You can actually see this triangle of the door is within range of a light, so it's being lit. But this triangle of the door that's on the same plane is ever so slightly outside the range, so it's not being lit. But I think I got the lights tuned well enough here that you don't really even notice that that's happening. Once you realize that's happening, you see it, but otherwise it's mostly hidden, which is kind of the intent. You can also tell whenever you look away, because you can see the light getting turned on and off whenever it's out of frame. Now, I don't think that's going to be a big issue in the final game for a couple reasons. One is I think there's going to be more global illumination to begin with. The game is very dark right now. And then the other thing is some of these lights are going to be baked. So I don't really want the light to spill out into this hallway anyway. So what I'll likely do is bake the lights so that that's not an issue, at least some of them. And not even just using Godot's light map baking. I think what I'm actually going to do is flatten a lot of this. So a lot of this geometry that's here now is just there to kind of block out and get the look. What I intend to do for most of this is actually flatten it into like an animated texture. So there won't actually be geometry. You know, things like these bellows here have a massive number of polygons compared to what you'd normally have in a scene for a PSX game. This door, I haven't profiled the scene, but I have to imagine probably has several hundred polygons just on this door alone, which is pretty excessive. That you wouldn't realistically see something like this in a PSX game because it has too many polygons. And I don't want to stifle it completely because it is, for all intents and purposes, a character in the game with how much you interact with it. But I also am not going to have it be this completely detailed, especially when stuff like this stuff down here could easily be flattened into a texture and it wouldn't really be that noticeable. And then things like these gears and that could be flattened pretty easily. The bellows, maybe not, we'll see. But getting back to what I said earlier, I'm not super happy with it yet because it does just look like a flat wall. So one thing that I think would help fix that is changing the background texture to be just greebling of more industrial machinery. And also, everything here is aligned and stuck on that back wall. Having stuff that goes into the background, like having a pipe that goes back into the wall, or having gears that are rotating this way up and down as opposed to round and round, would also help with that, giving the illusion of more depth. So I think there's some layering I can do there to fix this issue. Whether or not I'm going to actually do that for the art study, I don't know, but where I'm at the moment, I think I'm more or less happy with how this looks, minus the issues I've talked about. What I'm not happy with is the screen, and that is something I need to get figured out with the art study. I need to figure out what my texturing workflow is going to be and what strategy I'm going to use for it. So the screen, I like the amber. I think it's a good choice here. It's very bright. But I will say I tried this with the LCD green, and I also really liked that. I think when you look back at the reference images that I've been using from various movies, and we go back to, say, this, not that one, this one, you can see just how many of these movies had that sickly green in it. And it was a substantial portion of a lot of the frames. You can see everything in that scene is green. Half of that one is. A good half of that is. Probably at least a third of that one is. Even this has like a yellow-green hue to it. You know, a lot of these references that have the colors and the palette I like have a lot of that green. Now you also see a little bit of the amber there. There's some amber there. you can kind of call that amber. Definitely amber there. Some amber there. So you can see that there is the amber. I think is fine. I think I've got enough of that in the frame, but I think I may actually almost have too much of it. And I kind of want to bring some of the green back. So the lighting kind of helps with that, but it's not completely solving it. One idea I had was, you know, I could do that by, for instance, adding a big green vat of hydraulic fluid or something up in that corner or something like that. You know, little reservoirs of green liquid or something could be inside the door. But the other thing is the screens themselves could be a different color. So if we come back to the I need to open the other mini game. So if we go back to the runner mini game and we go all the way down here to the monitors and we just bring in these generic monitors again. So we'll put these back in the same spots. And then we hide these. So you can kind of see already how much of a difference that made. But whenever that's in the game, the sickly green from these, I really like it. It doesn't really make sense necessarily why these would be green, but I think I like that quite a bit. Now obviously it doesn't look quite right because it's missing the bezel, and that lack of some additional color is sort of washing the whole thing out. But there's a couple things though I will say. One, it's more viewable from further away. You can see the minigame screens from a lot further back. With the amber display, they kind of disappeared. But interestingly, one problem I did notice, even though these are both 64 by 64 or thereabouts for the playable area, I've noticed that the green becomes unreadable at a closer distance. So the amber, you could see it from back here pretty clearly. Now, way back here, it would disappear entirely, but you could see it from here pretty clearly. Here, half of the screens are just completely disappeared. And I'm not quite sure why that is. It may just have something to do with how bright the background is. But I do like the green. So I think that's going to be something I play with in the art study, is actually try both an amber and a green display. Now there is some, again, I don't want to get too hung up on the realism. There is some realism to having the green there. I don't have an example of it here, but little displays like this are used inside of like industrial control cabinets on things called PLCs. Sort of little microcontrollers that flip relays and stuff on and off. There are some that have that, so there is some explanation for that, but it, you know, you wouldn't see a full screen, and that's part of the reason why I don't necessarily like this, is that when I originally planned these green screens, it was for stuff like the cooking minigame, where the point is that it's being used as either like an LCD mask, like those old games you get from you know, McDonald's or wherever, or it's being used for text, like the reference was. With this, you don't generally see this type of screen being used for high resolution stuff. So I don't know. I kind of like the colors. I like how that it does add more of the green to here, but I don't necessarily like visually the readability of it, or the fact that it doesn't really make sense in my head why it would be green. Anyways, all that said, what I want to do now is look again at a sprite and try another stab at this monitor. So I took the one that we had last time and I saved it off as modern monitor. I'm going to save this as a new one and we'll call this retro monitor. There's a couple things I think I'm going to start with to change here. First and foremost, I guess we'll take the screen, we'll just hide that, is the actual bezel itself. So if we look at the reference material that I had already collected and should have been looking at last time, this is more what I was thinking of, is like an industrial control panel initially. So here you can see that it's just a flat panel, but you can see that the bezel for the screen is stuck onto the outside, or at least pushing through. It sticks up away from the panel. And this is more what I was thinking. I do like this form factor of it being rectangular with something off to either side, but I think what I want to do is move away from the more modern look of that and have something more like this, where the monitor is in the middle, but it has the bezel sticking out like this, and then just like a flat panel, or like how this has panels bolted onto another panel. Do something like that, I think would look a little bit better. So let's get rid of the texture, let's get rid of the color, let's get rid of that texture. So we're back here at just this. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this stuff out here. So these vents, I might add those back, but I think for the most part, they're probably not going to come back, because that was part of my issue with the thing. Okay, so now we're just left with the bezel. Now, the other thing I didn't like about this was that the bezel has these very sharp corners. And the more I look at it, I think there's two reasons why they look so sharp. One is that this right here looks like a chamfer. It doesn't look like a curve, which makes sense because it's not following the profile of a curve. It is just a straight line. So it looks like just a chamfer. And then the other thing is these, I don't even know what you'd call that. To be honest, this was kind of a Hail Mary. Just doing what I thought looked good. I don't really know what explanation there would be for why the light is behaving that way. But this line that separates from the rest of the shadow, I think is actually making that look like a crease. It makes it look sharper than it's intended to be. So what I want to start with is actually grabbing the circle tool and trying a different profile here. So I am going to try a little bit of a wider profile, and we'll see how that looks. So you can see that's quite a bit different than the current profile. And I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm just going to use this as a template. So I'm going to color it. And then what I'm going to do is go into the bezel and just start deleting stuff to match that profile. Okay. Oops, wrong layer. All right. So one other thing I'm actually noticing is I think these are different sizes. So if I bring that up, that's a 12 by 12. Oh, no, I guess it is the same. Okay. Fair enough. So back down to here. Oh no, that's definitely a different size. Huh. Is it closer to the... Yeah, it is closer to the bottom. Oh, well, no, that's... Yeah, that's because of the highlight. I'm gonna try to move it. Well... That's an interesting question, how you'd handle that. I think I'm just gonna try deleting that for the moment. And we'll see what that does. Or actually what I'll do is I'll delete it, and then I'm gonna add back that, and we'll see how that looks. And then we'll do the same thing over here. And actually we'll just start this time with that. I drew it on the wrong layer again. I really gotta just lock that layer whenever I start messing with it. Hold on, that ain't right. Nope, that ain't right at all, actually. Yeah, no, I made a pretty big mistake here. So that is not... This one should be lining up with that line. So that was the wrong spot to be doing that. Be hopeful this gets easier with time. All right, so let's try that again. So we'll do that, that, and that. No. I am struggling with the keyboard today, apparently. So again, we'll line that up. I guess there was a use for that after all. So we'll come in here and delete that. That wasn't entirely necessary. Some of these are just going to get added back. Okay. I think that did help. So looking at the texture here and there, it definitely does look more curved. I'll definitely say that. I don't think at the bottom highlighting the interior was the right move, because it's kind of creating this sharp outline. Or at the very least, that was the wrong color to highlight it with. But it does look, I think, better. Now, the other problem is, if I want to portray this as being stuck onto the panel, as, you know, the bezel goes through the panel, I need to actually draw it out further, but I don't have very much room vertically for that. So I'm going to have to look at the screen and probably crop it in. And shrink this whole thing to make that work. So if we come into here, let me see how much room I'm actually using now for the screen. We just grab... Vertically, it's 52 pixels. And horizontally, it's 80. I could probably bring that down to about 48. So that'd be 1 off each side to get it down to 50. So 2 off, I guess, on each side. I don't know if that would be enough, but I think that's not a bad start. And I'm not really worried about this being a power of 2. It doesn't realistically matter that much for this. So we'll bring that in, and I'll have to do the same thing with the screen as well, but actually, let me... Oh, no, that was fine. Okay. Well, that looks really strange now. But now I can come into the screen. And let me turn off some of this stuff and just see. Yeah, so it does need to go up. And that needs to go down. All right. That should be fine. And there we go. That's fine as well. I think the screen glow is probably okay. I don't think that, well, it probably does need to be adjusted a little bit. I really doubt that made that much of a difference, but okay. Yeah, okay, that definitely helped. I will say there is something strange. I think it's the glow does make that look. This almost looks like it's peeling away from the screen, like it's coming out. That's not exactly what I had in mind, but this is a start. So now I need to actually make it look like it is sitting on the outside. So my gut reaction is I need to basically have it come out, be the same color out here. And then I need to have a drop shadow, which I said the light was coming from the top. So there would need to be a drop shadow down here, which might mean, excuse me, might mean that I need to move the whole screen up in the texture, because I think I'm going to need more space at the bottom than I will at the top. I could probably start trying the effect out on the sides though, where I've got more space, and see if that works. I suppose the first thing I need to do though is I actually need to get rid of the highlight around the outside. So that's relatively easy to do. For one, I can just do, should be able to do that. Let's make sure it didn't grab any other pixels. It doesn't look like it did. All right, just delete that. And then the same thing for, let's make that contiguous. Same thing for that, and for that. Yeah, and actually, see, now it's not rounded anymore. So I guess I still needed that, that reference circle. We'll bring that back. And again, we'll put that in a new layer. That could work. I think that's too aggressive. That's what? How many pixels is that? That's 17. All right, let's try a little bit smaller. I think that's the size I had before. Yeah, okay, so I would need to bring that in. Out of curiosity, what size is this one? 13, okay. All right, let's give it a shot and let's see how that looks. I think that might be too aggressive, but I'm gonna go ahead and do the whole thing first, just to confirm. Yeah, definitely looking a little bit aggressive on that curve. Especially this top corner. Wow, that is... takes a huge chunk out of the top. That doesn't... No, that doesn't seem right. Why... Why is so much of that being eaten up there? I guess it is. There's 4 pixels there. Oh, yep. You know what it is? It's because I removed that top pixel, or that top row of pixels. That was actually, because that was, I had been shading over it. That actually removed an important piece. So that is supposed to be there. Yeah, okay. That explains that. I accidentally deleted my circle again. Nice. Okay, well, I'll just bring it back. Get the right shape. Oh, that's one too large. I guess I could look down here. Yeah, okay. So it was actually 14 by 14. It's still a very aggressive cutoff there, but we'll try it anyways, just see how it looks. That is one thing I'm trying to get out of the habit of is making discrediting an idea like this before I've actually tried it. I don't want to lock myself out of anything that might be good. Okay, so now I can hide that. Let's see. It's interesting. Obviously I need to do that with the inside as well. I don't think I like that. I think it is too aggressive. It's too much of a curve. For the thickness of this bezel, it gets way too thin in the middle. And, you know, I can do a different radius in the, in there, for example. So I can actually bring that up. You know, I could do a completely different radius. Make a wider radius so that there's more material in the corners. But if I look at the reference material, this generally is a fairly narrow radius in the middle. And if I look at the screens, I think it's the case there too that, let me find a different one. Well, you know what? Maybe not actually. Now I look at these. The inner radius and the top radius actually don't seem to be that different. Okay. They're actually a fairly tight radius too, now that I look at it. This looks more curved than I think it is because of the darkness. Well, that also looks quite curved. What I'm getting at is I don't think it needs to be this aggressive as a curve anyways. It looks to me like the way this works is that you do a very tight curve, tight radius in the middle, that same radius out here, then more, you know, a slightly larger one on the very outside maybe. Okay. I think that's doable, so I'll go ahead and look at changing that. Before that though, I am going to take a quick break and we'll be back in a couple minutes. All right, so back to this. Taking a look at where we're at here, I think I will try the tighter radius. Let's see. We'll grab this circle and we'll just get rid of that. So that looks like it was actually 14 was the radius there. So let me try an 11. And I'm actually going to need to set this to a different mode. And let me change its color actually, so that I can get, there we go. Let me actually see, does that, use the blue. Oops. Okay, perfect. All right, so I need to add some pixels back here. And we'll just use that same color. And let me just see for sake. Okay, that's 9, so that's a couple sizes. Oops. A couple sizes down. All right, I'm also gonna go ahead and I'm gonna copy this to all 4 corners so I can stop doing that. Okay, and then up here as well. Okay. So now I'll come down to here. And we'll just color that in. Good news is we're just adding back, not taking away, so makes this a little bit simpler of an operation. Okay. Let's hide the guides. That's exactly what I started with. I should have noticed that. Okay. Let me try a different size circle then. Let me grab this again, and so that was 11. Let me try 10. Is that going to be any different? No, 10's going to look the same. All right, let me try 9, see how that looks. Nope, also the same. 8, I don't think is going to look substantially different. So let's actually go bigger. So we'll try 12. I'm a little skeptical that that's going to work the way I want it to, but I will say I need to see if I can find a plugin for Sprite that does rectangles with rounded corners, because as far as I can tell, that's just not built into Sprite, which is unfortunate. Not that it would necessarily help me a ton here, but it'd be good to know for the future. Okay, now one of these is a different color. Oh, actually, that's just because of the shadow. Okay. Now that, I think, looks better. Yeah. So that was the answer. Just a little bit smaller than 13. 1 pixel makes all the difference sometimes. Now the inside, I don't think is quite right. So let me apply the same pattern to the inside. And of course, oops. Told myself I wasn't going to make that mistake again. The tricky part is realizing where the inside is here, actually. Is that right? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, okay. Oh yeah, I guess because yeah, it is lined up with that. All right. Yep. Okay. Now this is going to be a little bit trickier to figure out where I need to put pixels and where I need to take them away. I think these red ones are the ones that need to... Yes, the red ones are the ones that need to be added. Yeah, okay, so that should be the same for all four corners. So we'll start with this bottom one. We'll just sample this highlight color there, and oh man, that's interesting. Why did that not work? Ah, it's not working because of the screen. Okay. I should have just hid that from the start. That would have made this much easier. Okay, now there up here's a different color, so I need to sample, I'm guessing, this darker color here. Yep. Oh, what the heck? Oh. Preview looks like I'm designing some sort of UI for a game. All right. Now that's not gonna work right away because of the screen is actually overlapping it. Which I'm wondering now why I did put the screen above the bezel. Let me see, was there a reason for that? Can I just move it below? Or is that gonna break everything? The whole thing got darker. That's kind of interesting. Why did that happen? Oh, right. Because I put the... Yeah, okay. Yeah, alright. I know what happened there. Alright, well, I'm going to leave that up then, and then I need to go into here. I assume this would be... actually probably the shadow and the background both need to be deleted. I'll need to come up with a better way of doing that. I think realistically the bezel should probably be part of that layer and just put in somewhere in there, probably underneath glow. Might do that here in a moment. Alright, so that would be the screen shadow is the next one I need to remove. Yeah, okay. I think that looks much, much closer to a bezel now. I will say this bottom part is a little nondescript. I see this as being a curve right there. My brain's recognizing that as a curve. But then it's almost like the plastic is twisting and going from an inner curve to being flat right here. And then this bottom part is kind of flat again. So I at the top of it, I definitely see a curved bezel. But the bottom part's not registering right with me, so there's still something a little bit off there that needs to be figured out. But I think that's definitely starting to register more how I wanted it to. All right, so now let me see about moving this bezel right there, so that hopefully that's not an issue anymore. Kind of defeats the purpose of this folder, I guess, but whatever. All right, so now the next thing would be this needs to come out a little bit. So this is the sloped part of the bezel. Now there needs to be a flat part before it goes back. Before I do that though, I am actually going to take these references and I am gonna I keep doing it. I did it again. I told myself I wouldn't do it. Turn that into a drinking game at this point. Okay, I don't know how much I'm gonna want, but I want to try and get. So let's see, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4. I don't really want to go all the way to the edge with this. I think that's too far. So let's maybe do 1 2 3, 1 2 3. We'll see how that looks. All right. And last one. Okay. This looks like markers for like a QTE event or something. All right, so now what I will do is I'm actually going to make a new layer up here for the front part, just so that I don't screw up any of what I've already done. And we'll trace this out in... I'm going to use... I don't want to use this flat gray. I think I'm going to use a slightly lighter one around here. And yeah, I'm not going to curve that in. Now I'm going to do something I should have done before. I'm going to cheat and just move this. And there we go, like magic. And now we'll bring in the rest of the outline. No, I didn't go too far there. All right. And I am going to go ahead and just fill this in like that. I could probably just flood fill this. I don't think that would cause me any weird issues, but for the moment, I'll just keep the middle clear just in case that does come up as a problem later. Okay, and now I can flood fill that. Make sure that's oh. Okay, so now the trick is going to be making this look like it's standing out. So the light's coming from above, so there should be a highlight up there, a highlight right here, a shadow down here, and then the sides, maybe a highlight around here somewhere. I think the highlight might just extend around that edge. Looking at it here, I do think I see 2 stages of depth though, which is kind of what I was looking for. Now I'm gonna have to blend this color into this panel, which is gonna be the interesting part. Because this is further out, so I guess it should actually be lighter than the panel. I think that's how that would work. Or maybe it would be the same color as the panel. Either way, we'll start with that. So where's my highlight color here? We'll just start along the top and figure out what I'm doing is I'm going and then there should be a highlight here as well. Yeah, that's way too light though. That needs to be definitely needs to be darker than that. That is unreasonably bright. That is still unreasonably bright. Okay, well, that might be a little bit of an issue, but we'll see. because the contrast makes that look brighter than it even needs to be. Although I guess it's probably less of an issue. So let me do something temporarily here. I'm going to grab the edges of this, and I'm actually going to darken them up. And this is just temporary. Because what I'm going to do is flood fill this with a different color. Because I think what's happening... Well, actually, you know what? Not terrible. On the sides, at least, that actually kind of... I might actually extend the drop shadow, or the drop shadow up along the sides. Because that works a little bit better than I thought it would. Was not actually intending on that, but now I'm kind of curious if I use a less dark color. How does that look? Yeah. Not terrible. But anyways, what I was getting at was that I want to actually fill this inner part with the lighter gray. Yeah, it's not quite right. Let me actually let me try an even lighter gray here. So that is what, 140. Let's maybe try 160 here. And no, that was really the wrong move. Yeah, the trick is that this is supposed to be in shadow in here. This whole section should be darker, because what I'm painting at the moment is the lighting. And my thought is that the lighting of this panel and of this flat part shouldn't really be different. I don't think. So maybe... Let me get rid of that 160 so I don't accidentally use it. This might actually be correct. It may just look weird because it's not textured. So we'll say front plate, I don't know. Or facade. We'll call it that. Lower the tolerance. Well, actually raise the tolerance, I suppose. Not enough, apparently. Okay, there we go. So let me make a new layer. And I'm going to grab some of my texture, which I'm actually going to do through my content browser here. Which interestingly is not working correctly. Okay, I don't know why that's broken again. I'll fix that later. But let me grab some of the texture that I want to sample. I think last time I used cork, I think, for the plastic. I think I might try a different texture as well this time. Something a little more uniform than the cork. So I think I had talked about using the like a knife, sharp whetstone. I think I'm gonna try that this time. I can get Windows image viewer to actually load it. Yeah, that's not working. Okay, let me try this through my own tool. Unfortunately, because I did take these at such a high resolution, they really do not like to be viewed in anything. All right, let me see if I can actually open it in A-Sprite. And this would be Stone 1, I think. Yeah, we'll go ahead and open all of them. I don't think A-Sprite is gonna like this. Might be crashing. Because these are like 12,000 DPI images or something, whatever the max on the scanner was. Yeah, even the cancel button doesn't work. Alright, well, this may not end well. Oh, there's one of them. That's quartz, I think. Don't think that's gonna be what I want. Slate, not necessarily what I want. Ah, there we go. The lag on zooming in is pretty crazy. Oh, I should not have done that with the magic. That was the wrong tool. Oh, it is going to be very unhappy about that. No. Wanted that one. Yeah, using A-Sprite for anything other than pixel art, it really does not like it when you get high resolution images. Okay, yeah, this is the layer I set up for that. The size of that image compared to... Yeah, see, those grains I think are too big still. I think there may just be too much noise in this image. All right, that looks like a good scale. Okay. So we'll hide that, come in here, use the lasso or the magic. Then we'll Control-Shift-I to invert, delete. Okay, there we go. Actually, I guess that's not all I wanted to do. I also want the inside of the screen too. Let me see. How can I grab that? That would be the background layer, I guess. And then come up here to the facade. Is it Control? And then I also want the bezel. Okay, I think that's got everything I wanted. So now I can come up here to layer 2. And I can Control-Shift-I, delete. There we go. And now I can cut out the background. There we go. That's what I was trying to do. Went about that the long way. All right, lock that. So now we'll set this layer first and foremost, remove the color. All right. And then we'll set this to something like a overlay. Overlay is not quite what I want, I don't think. Yeah, multiply looks a little bit better. Let's mess with the opacity here. See see if I can make that look. I'm trying to give the impression of that sandblasted textured plastic look. Fortunately, it keeps turning out as stone, which I think is partially because of the medium gray. Although, actually, let me look at my references real quick. See, that to me looks textured, but it might not be. Also, let me close that stone so A-Sprite doesn't crash on me. Let me see. So, yeah, see, this one's smooth, and that one I think might be textured. I'm also noticing, okay, a couple of interesting things here. So we can see the shadow comes down in a diagonal. That makes sense. We've got a highlight here. Now this, obviously, the light's coming in from this corner, I think. But, so we do see a bright line there in the corners. And I don't think the light's perfectly centered here, which is why it's different, but... Okay. That's good to know. So then I probably don't want it at the top, but I do probably want that bright streak there. So if I don't do that and I keep it like that, then probably what I'd want to do instead, I'll leave that like that for the moment, and then what I'm going to do is actually do a different layer, and I'll just lasso all of that, and on this new layer I'll just fill it with black, and we'll say this is textured bezel, and we'll call this smooth bezel. We'll just hide that one. So now on this one, we can set that to multiply or overlay. I don't know if there's really that much of a difference here. So I am noticing that, yes, the outside, at least at the top, is lighter. Although in this one, it's darker and the inside's lighter. Let me see, where's the light source coming from here? Not quite sure. Maybe from head on, maybe. But yeah, I'm noticing here, so this is quite a bit lighter than that shadow. And this is lighter even than what's right there. And then it eventually kind of fades into the same color. But then it's much darker down there. So I think that might be part of my problem, is that my shading isn't quite right on this. I think I need to make this bit darker gradually as it goes down and keep this part lighter. And I think if I do that, I might be better off. I think one thing I'm going to do, though, is actually get rid of this line. I'm not really sure that's doing me any favors here. So I will just sample whatever color that is. I'll try that again. Sample it, and then okay. Now, I've got some options to shade this manually. One thing I want to check, so what is the interior of that? Okay, on both of them, that is lighter at the bottom, so that makes sense. So it would just be the outside that's like that. Okay. And yeah, there's not really any detail. I might actually shrink this because I'm noticing that this one has a very thin flat part. This one's a little bit thicker, but it's still nowhere near as thick as the interior. So I think this is actually a little bit too big. So actually, let me grab this tool. And I'll just bring it in like 1 pixel. Okay, and that's going all right. So then we'll do the same thing down here. All right, and then we'll clean that up. No, and actually, now that I've gotten that one right, I am just going to redraw the other ones, or copy the other ones from that one, just so that I don't screw it up. All right. And then I will just use the box and redraw in the lines here. All right, and then delete the rest of that. All right, well, I deleted too much on that side, but all right. Fix that. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't look too bad. All right, so now what I need to do is shade it. And I think I have a tool for that. So does this have, this is a plugin I got off Itch. I think it had one. Oh, it's desaturate is what it was. Lift merge, no, not quite. Let me see, what color mode do I have this in? RGB, okay. I don't know if the shading tool works. I don't think it does work with continuous colors. I don't know how to actually shade that without selecting a specific color. So what I'm gonna do is just grab a new layer, grab a low transparency gray, make this a little bit darker than what I had, like 96. Man, that is really annoying. And we'll make that like 128. Okay. Okay, perfect. So I will shade. Let me just take another look at this. So yeah, so the top gets quite light at the top and then it gets darker as it goes down. So let me bring this down even more. And I'm actually going to use the spray tool, I think, for this. Let me bring up the dynamics. Bring that up to like a 6. Yeah, there we go. I may bring that down to like a 9. All right, and then we'll make another pass along the bottom. Not entirely certain this is going to do anything even remotely like what I want it to do, but because it occurs to me that this isn't probably not going to do what I want, because it's going to make it very pixelated. Yeah, that really was not the right call. Okay, may have been easier to just do it this way. I think what I'll do is probably just mirror this, so I'll just focus on one side. All right, starting to get there, starting to see some semblance of it. Let me go ahead and copy. Oh, was I drawing that right on the facade? Of course I was. Let's lock that layer first, and now let's do that. Okay. I could use one of Sprite's gradients. I don't really like the gradient tool in Sprite though. The way it works to me is just really unintuitive. So I tend to avoid it, and I end up doing stuff like this, drawing my gradients by hand. Which is probably not the most efficient or smartest way to do this, but it's what I do. Okay, that's something. Now let me try copying that, but only half of it. It is not how I intended to do that. Okay, you know what I can do? I'm doing this the dumb way again. I am going to just delete shading on that side, and then I'm just going to copy everything on this side. Okay. It definitely does give some illusion of shape to it. Definitely not dark enough though, so let me try doing an adjustment on that. Let me try bringing the brightness down some. Honestly, I think the top is too bright still. But that's interesting. I'm not sure that really looks how I would expect it to. I think part of it is still the shading in the middle here is not right. From what I saw, it should be lighter in these corners and across the bottom. Quite a bit lighter, I think. Because I can darken that up a lot. But that doesn't really make it look any more like a screen bezel. And let me... Okay. I'm going to stick with that for the moment. Let me look at that again. Yeah, on both of them, it's interesting because it almost completely fades into this background color. Which if we consider this the neutral color, I suppose all of this is probably too dark. The whole image may actually need to brighten up. Which actually just is a... let's see as an interesting test here. If I just adjust the brightness of the background to make it darker. Yeah. Yeah, okay. The moment I do that, suddenly it starts to look more correct. So I overshaded it. Yeah, so when you make that really dark, get a stray pixel there, but when I make that really dark, it actually stands out quite a bit. And if I get it closer to that color to where it starts to blend in, yeah, that looks more like what I was expecting. That's actually quite a bit of a difference though. So I'm gonna have to go in and adjust the brightness of quite a few of these layers to make that more what I would expect. The other issue is I'm seeing this part here now looks flat. This not so much. This does look like it look correct, but this bottom piece looks flat. This actually looks like the flat, and this looks like a bevel around the outside, which I suppose it kind of is, but this is supposed to be inside, and that does not look right. So my lighting on this part is wrong, which I kind of already knew. The sides I think are kind of hit or miss. They're in between for me. The top looks good. I'm pretty happy with that. The shadow is helping a lot. This is just not right. It's too flat. So I've got to work on that. I think I should probably do that before I do the contrast adjustment. One thing I am going to do though is figure out what corner has a stray pixel on it and what layer that's on. So let me do this the cheaty way of just filling in the background with orange. Not the facade. So it might be one of these bezel layers. Ah, there we go. Yep. Relock that. And ditch that. Bring that back. It's funny, that's too big now. So that's the smooth texture. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna go ahead and just delete those two layers for now, since I've got some other adjustments I need to do. Is this okay? That was just the guides. I'll delete those, and then that is the, I don't know, we'll call that, well, I already have facade. Facade bevel, we'll say. I think it is looking better. It's starting to look more and more like an actual monitor. So ultimately, this is just one workflow for making these textures. And honestly, I'm not even following the original tutorial that much anymore. I've deviated pretty thoroughly from it because I'm not an artist and I'm struggling with the lighting. But the other alternative, or there's two. The other one is the Ben Mathis approach, which is similar. It still deals with lighting, but it does not deal with it doesn't use the medium gray. I might find that a little bit easier since I'm finding some difficulty in balancing the gray levels clearly. So there's that approach, and then the other approach would be you just model it in 3D and then flatten it and render it out, which is the more modern approach of doing it. But I believe that was done to some degree at the time as well, and it really doesn't even matter if it produces the same look. The reason I'm going with this approach and why I'm kind of sticking with it for so long is my understanding is that a lot of PSX textures were hand painted. They weren't rendered, from my understanding. Now that may be completely wrong, but at least what I've heard. I think what I'm gonna do for the moment is I'm gonna go ahead and export this out and just see. I mean, obviously this is missing the color, this is missing the texture, but I want to see this in the actual engine and see what it looks like. So we'll pop over to Godot, and in the monitor here, I am going to change the sprite to the retro one. And now let's see what that looks like. You know, it would help is if I actually swapped this back. All right, so hide those and then hide those. Well, it's a little hard to tell with the I do still stand by what I said. The orange does seem to be easier to see at a distance. It's still not great, but I mean, it doesn't matter because you're intended to play it right up close anyways, which is fine. Yeah, okay. It's definitely looking more like an actual monitor, I think. It does occur to me that because these are tilted, the light should probably be even more pronounced here at the bottom. Because it is kind of muddy. Even here, it looks pretty muddy at the bottom. But yeah, okay. I do think that this is along the right direction. So I'm going to keep playing with this. And at the end, once we get the whole panel, I'm going to try experimenting with green on the display instead and see. I'll try it both with just replacing the amber with green, and then I'll try it the LCD way where the background is the neon green and the foreground is stark, and we'll see how that goes. And ultimately what I'm going to try to do for the art study is, I forget if I said this, I am going to try to finish a complete scene. So what, like the door, the hallway, and a mini game. And then I want to also experiment with the HUD and with the menu, because I want to make sure both the in-game menu for like the settings and the main menu, because the main menu I want to actually have on one of these displays as well and have it be fully 3D. Whether that's possible, I don't know. So I need to test that. And then the settings menu to make sure that at this small resolution, there's actually enough room to have the settings. So I may take a break from this, and we may look at the settings and the main menu for a little bit and come back to it. I want to get this wrapped up within like the next week or so. I don't want to rush it because it is pretty important to the overall look of the game. If I'm going to be in development for about a year is what I'm thinking. I want to make sure I've got a firm idea of how I need to be doing this now rather than redefining the art style 6 months in. So I don't want to rush it, but I don't want to spend more than about another week, maybe 2 on it, because I do have other things I need to do in pre-production. And I really don't want to stay in pre-production for longer than about a month if I can avoid it. Okay. Well, I don't really want to start anything new today, so I'm going to call it there. And that's it. See you all next time. Bye.